Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Snappily written, fast-paced, and witty are just some of the stylistic signatures that USA Today has described the four-decade career of best-selling author Janet Evanovich. A literary legend with over 200 million books in print in 40 languages around the world. Kicking off her breakout success with the famed Stephanie Plum series, highlighted by Publishers Weekly as America's favorite bounty hunter, who ABC News recently noted made her debut more than 35 years and many millions of sales back in 1994 with One for the Money, and wildly successful singles like Two for the Dough, Three to Get Deadly, Four to Score, High Five, Hot Six, 7 Up, Hard 8, To the Nines, 10 Big Ones, 11 on Top, 12 Sharp, Lean Mean 13, Plum Spooky, Fearless 14, Finger Lickin' 15, Sizzling 16, Smokin' 17, Explosive 18 and Notorious 19, Takedown 20, Top Secret 21, Tricky 22, 23, Hardcore 24, Look Alive 25, Twisted 26, Tantalizing 27, Fortune and Glory, Game On, Tempting 28, Going Rogue, Rise and Shine 29, and 30 on 30. The Lizzie and Diesel spin-off series with Wicked Appetite, Wicked Business, and Wicked Charms. And the Alex Barnaby and NASCAR driver Sam Hooker trilogy with Metro Girl, Motormouth, Troublemaker, and Troublemaker 2, the latter two co-written with her daughter Alex. Her co-writing has been prolific across the Night and Moon series with Curious Minds and Dangerous Minds, collaborating with Doreen Kelly on Love in a Nutshell and The Husband List, and pairing FBI agent Kate O'Hare and con artist Nicholas Fox more recently when she teamed up to write the Fox and O'Hare series with Lee Goldberg over The Caper, The Heist, The Chase, The Job, The Scam and The Pursuit, along with novellas Pros and Cons and The Shell Game, and more recently The Big Kahuna, which she transitioned to co-writing with son Peter, and then The Bounty with Steve Hamilton. The Full House series, which Janet co-authored with Charlotte Hughes over Full House, Full Tilt, Full Speed, Full Blast, Full Bloom, and Full Scoop, and her nonfiction book, How to Write. The LA Times recently reported that Evanovich will soon make a wider splash with 2 TV series in the works, one based on a new character, Gabrielle, who was featured in the 27th Plum book and played a prominent role in the 28th. The other series in development centers on the characters, Fox and O'Hare, adding that a film based on the 1994 One for the Money, the first of the Plum series, was released by Lionsgate in 2012, starring Kathleen Heigl of Grey's Anatomy. As hot as ever, Deadline reported in 2020 that best-selling author Janet Evanovich has packed to write her next 4 novels for the Simon & Schuster imprint Atria Books. The deal is substantial 8 figures for world rights. This is a significant publishing industry move, as she is one of the biggest-selling authors in the world, including her newest series, Recovery Agent. And she takes out time today to be here to talk about it all. Janet, we are so honored to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us. We've heard so many charming stories from peers of yours who were natural storytellers growing up. Were you of that club, and was this something you knew you wanted to do when you grew up?
I think I've always been a storyteller. Back when I was a kid, we called it fibbing. I was always the kid that could draw. I was never a big reader. I read comic books. I always had a pad. I was always drawing. When I went to college, I majored in fine arts. I was a painter. And when I graduated from college, I got married, had a variety of really hideous jobs that I was a complete failure at, and had a couple kids. And I was still trying to paint, and it was just not working for me. And what I finally realized is that when I was painting, I was always telling myself stories about what I was painting.
Wow, that's fascinating. How important a moment of realization did that prove for you to be?
We needed money. I don't come from a moneyed background, and my husband was going for his doctorate in mathematics, and we were struggling to keep him in school. I was a stay-at-home mom. So I thought, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to be a writer, and we'll sell it to the movies, and I'll be rich and famous. And then 10 years later, I finally sold my first book for a whopping amount of $2,000. And that was a romance.
ABC News in recent years reported that more than 30 years and millions of sales later, the story of her first book deal still makes Janet Evanovich cry. Please share a bit with viewers, if you would, about how your charmed career began with that initial inspiration to write Hero at Large.
It's different. I was 44 when my first book was published. Um, and, here I am, um, well, more than 30 years, 30, 35, 36 years later, which seems impossible since I'm not that old to be able to. Stephanie and I decided that my heroines and I were never going to age. We were just going to, be held in time forever. Um, when that first book came out, it was, it was just this amazing thing. And it was a little romance novel, a little paperback romance novel. And it was in Walden, and I had a Walden Books by my house, a little store in a mall. And so I got dressed up and I went to Walden Books and I stood there and waited for somebody to buy my book. I wanted to see it happen. And nobody bought my book that day. So the next day I got dressed up and I went to Walden Books and I stood there and nobody bought my book. And that was when the publisher would put out 10 different books, and there would be maybe 20 of each of those books, and they would be in, a rack, and people were coming in and buying my book. So the third day I went in, I didn't get dressed up. I'd run out of nice clothes. I don't know, I think I had on sweats or something. Anyway, I was standing there and two women came in and they had a list and my book was on their list and they bought my book. So of course I rushed over and I said to them, hi, I'm the author. I'm Janet Evanovich. Would you like me to sign the book? And they called security on me. I had to show them my driver's license, and it wasn't, the experience that I had expected. So, and it's different now. When books come out, when that first book came out, there was just the thrill of it, the unbelievable wonderfulness of it. It was like a fairy tale. It was hard to believe that was my book sitting there. When a book comes out now, there's so many expectations for it that it's more like a fearful experience. It's more that I'm terrified that I've written a really crappy book, a real stinker, and all my readers are going to be so disappointed. And you never know, because some books are better than others. I mean, that's no matter how hard you try. And readers look for different things in books. And so when the book comes out now, it's more like the first day of terror to see the reaction to it and to see, how it goes. And then of course you're looking for sales and, you're hoping that, dear God, somebody buys the book. And after about a week, then I relaxed a little and I kind of enjoy the fact that I actually did another book.
Is it the same for you every book now, or was that first time you saw your name on the cover the most memorable?
Everything, absolutely everything. That was my learning ground. Everything from character development to the process, to working with editors, to probably the most important thing that I took away was the business side of it. Because as a romance writer, when I started out, we just didn't have a lot of respect in the business. I had to take a pseudonym. I wanted to use my mother's name, Anna Marie Nielsen, and they said no. They didn't think that the reader could remember 3 words. So I became Steffi Hall. But that was, and nobody was putting money into advertising or to promoting you as an author. So, we had to learn all of these things, how to do these things on our own, how to be creative. And there was a sisterhood. I belonged to Romance Writers of America. And it was, so I had this wonderful peer group and made some amazing friends, and we supported each other and we promoted each other, and we passed on, things that were successful in our own lives. So that was, just everything. And when I moved to the crime genre, I took what I liked best, because I was never the best romance writer. I was their token humor writer. There wasn't a lot of humor in romance, and I was it. And so and eventually became clear that I was not going to stay in romance because I just couldn't get all those pages out of sheer relationship. And I kept sneaking in mystery lines and they keep ripping them out. And so, but I liked the positive aspect of it. I liked that it was about good people. I liked that they ended well. They were happy endings. They were about family. They were, I took all of those things that I thought were good and important, and the best parts of women especially, and I took the men that I knew made wonderful heroes, which is the bad boy hero, the guy who is a good guy. He has high moral standards, but they're his own. They're not necessarily the tenets of the society around him. And so I squashed them into the mystery format. And I did that because I was looking, I wanted a larger audience. My audience as a romance writer writing the little books was very small, it was finite. I couldn't grow because there was no backlist. And I wanted to entertain, I think of myself as an entertainer. I wanted to entertain a larger audience. And at the time, Tom Clancy was the big deal. And I looked at Tom Clancy and I said, why is he having this success? And it was because he found a hole in the marketplace. And that's what we all have to do. We have to find a hole in the marketplace. We have to find something that people want and don't have yet. And we have the ability to give them. And that was what I did with making this hybrid of my romance background and the mystery genre.
Looking back over that early romance era of your catalog, what are a few of your personal favorites among Thanksgiving, the grand finale, Wife for Hire, Foul Play, there's Manhunt, Ivan Takes a Wife, aka Love Overboard, Back to the Bedroom, Smitten, Rocky Road to Romance, and Naughty Neighbor to Write? And what do you feel that you learned skill set wise from these early works? Early works that aided you as you made your transition into crime fiction in the very early 90s?
Not Stephanie, because Stephanie is more me. I mean, this is not autobiographical, but I know who she is. She has my background. We come from working class people. We're blue collar, first to graduate from college, not especially brave, not especially good at many things. But, we have tenacity and we have friends and family. And so I know a lot about her. I know how she reacts. I learned how to do dialogue by doing improv. But when I go out on tour and I do an event, I mean, I probably do stand up because you mic me up and that's it. Nobody else has a chance. I mean, whether I do television or whether I'm on stage, I'm standing back there and I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this. I'm looking at my watch and can't we just get this over with? And then the guy comes, and he clips the thing on your belt and he mics you up and you go out there on the stage or you go out and you sit in that chair. And I'm like, ta-da, I'm Janet, I'm this, and then you can't get me off. I mean, I just love it. As soon as I get mic'd up and I get out there and the people are all there, and I love a live audience, when I'm on stage and there's an auditorium filled with people, I just feed off them. And I like when, the lights aren't too bright. So, you can see the people, you can relate to them. I mean, these are my folks, right? And it's my moment. And the hard part is like when I do television and you've got I don't know, like 45 seconds or something. You're up there with Al Roker and all of a sudden it's over. And I'm like, but I got a lot of good stuff. I don't want to go. And they have to sort of pry me out of the chair, for the next person.
Now, we understand the first book that launched the series, One for the Money, was actually inspired in part by one of my favorite movies of all time, Midnight Run. Starring Robert De Niro as a bounty hunter chasing Charles Grodin, known in the movie as the Duke, down with mobster Jimmy Serrano, played by Dennis Farina, on their heels. Did you do any ride-alongs of your own with bounty hunters while you were researching the series and mainstay characters?
When I decided that I was going to do my version of Midnight Run, I knew nothing about bounty hunters or bail bondsmen. And so I went out and I was living in Fairfax, Virginia, which is right on the Beltway of Washington, D.C. And I went out and I hung out with some actual bounty hunters, which was amazing because, I mean, we went in these very high crime areas that were in DC, rode along with them and tried to figure out what they did, how I wanted to translate that to Stephanie. And Stephanie didn't take on very many of those characteristics, but Ranger did. They became Ranger, and I, eventually enhanced Ranger. And Ranger is the one character in the series that has had a lot of growth. I try to make a little growth in each of the characters, but Ranger has changed over the years. I hung out with bail bondsman, it's an amazing industry. And actually in New Jersey, they changed the laws, and there are no more bail bondsmen in New Jersey. So we're pretending that's not the case, but I hung out with a lot of bail bondsmen. I learned about the industry. I hung out with the cops in Trenton. They were great. They had me walking around. I am not a gun person. I had never touched a gun. But I learned how to shoot. I carried pepper spray. I got a stun gun, practiced with all these things so I could see what that was about.
NPR would elaborate in a report on their own in the series creation that the walls of the holding cages are grease-stained from all the people who sat here, handcuffed to the benches over the years. The authorities say some of the more colorful crooks have ended up in the Stephanie Plum books, like the bicycle-riding thief they arrested who wore a Nixon mask and carried a shotgun, our Lucky Lou. Is that true that many of the most memorable villains from this series were based off real-life characters who'd spent time in this local Trenton, New Jersey jail?
It was mostly stories from the cops, and I would spend time in the police station there. And they did take me through, they would walk me through where people were being held in the cages. And I haven't been back to Trenton in a while, so I imagine some of it has changed. But at the time, the benches where they would, chain people to them, and I mean, cops have this black sense of humor. I mean, they have to. It's a hard job. It's a very hard job, and staying a good person as a cop is a hard job. All of the people that I knew did that. They were just amazing. But they had a sense of humor about. Yeah, we had to, give them a shot of pepper spray, and then we chained them, it was a wooden bench. We chained them to the bench, and they sit there and they wait to get booked. And so I wanted to have my picture taken. So I said, well, I'll sit on the bench. No, you don't want to sit on that bench. you don't want to go anywhere near there, because once you get pepper spray, your nose runs and your eyes run, and yeah. So it was stuff like that. They locked me up in a cell, and see how that felt. That wasn't so good.
Now, the first Stephanie Plum novel introduces readers to plenty of colorful characters. Clarence Sampson, Lonnie Dodd, and William Erling, to name a few. What was most thrilling about creating these tracking down chases between Stephanie and each of the cases? Joe Morelli is another that comes right to mind.
He was not based on any one in particular. Both Morelli and Ranger came out of my experience as a romance writer. And they were really, and a lot of Stephanie did as well. They were, conglomerates. They were mixtures of what I knew my readers liked in a hero.
Did you envision this as a series from the first book out? And did that tie into the title, One for the Money? That would then become a thematic part of the sequels to follow?
Yeah, I really wanted it to be a series. I had been writing these romance novels, and I think I did 12 of them. And, and you generated them so quickly. They were small. like I said, they didn't have a long shelf life. If you wanted to, I had, my husband was teaching at a university system. I had a couple kids who were looking at going to college. We didn't have a lot of money. I had to make some money. So I had to, it was like Mickey Spillane. They asked him, how long does it take to write a book? And he said, how bad do I need the money? And it was kind of like that. So I was writing, 3 books a year, sometimes I think once I did 4 books a year. And it was just unsatisfying. I never really got to know the characters. I'd be writing a book and I'd be substituting the wrong names in for them because I couldn't remember who I was writing about. So I really wanted to have a series that I could stick with, which was one of the reasons why I set it in New Jersey. And I created a heroine that I knew very well. At least I knew the way she would react so that I could be consistent over a bunch of years. I never envisioned 30. Sometimes be careful what you wish for.
Now, once you'd successfully transitioned out of romance and into mystery with this first bestseller, you also won the 1995 Dillis Award from the Independent Mystery Booksellers Association, a clear acknowledgement that you had the green light to keep writing in Stephanie's shoes. And throughout 2 for the Dough, 3 to Get Deadly, and 4 to Scores examples, we meet all sorts of cool characters. One of the coolest being Big Blue, Stephanie's powder blue 1953 Buick Roadmaster, and other recurring series regulars like boss Vinnie Plum, his office manager Connie, fellow bounty hunters Lula and Ranger, Jimmy Alpha, Grandma Mazur, Joe Morelli, Joyce Barnhart, Uncle Leo and Aunt Betty, funeral homeowner Constantine Steva. The list just goes on and on. How many of these had roots from your own extended family?
These are all, people that I knew and grew up with. I mean, the names all came out of my high school yearbook. It was, I grew up in this small town in central Jersey, went to, the local college. My parents lived on the outskirts of Trenton. They went into the Burg. This was back, 40 years ago when the Burg was an enclave for the mob and had lots of good restaurants. And the Burg has really changed. Now it's an evolving neighborhood, just like, every other neighborhood. But I knew all of these people, who they were and what their lifestyle was. And how they talked, because it was Jersey. And when I first started writing, I couldn't write dialogue. It was very wooden. I had no skills. I didn't have an English background. So, but I had a friend who was teaching acting and she was doing an improv class. And that was actually how I learned how to create character and write dialogue. I would get up on stage and I would have to bring props and I always have to decide, what mannerisms, people had that told you who they were, how they would walk and talk. And that was how I learned how to, how to have that skill. So, that was, and I still, when I write, it's a movie to me. I see it. I see these people walking with me. It's in color. I know what they look like. I know where they're going. So this whole improv on stage experience, still carries over into when I'm writing. And I do hear these people, I hear the way Lula talks. She has her own language. The only person that really came directly out of my history was Grandma Mazur, because she's my Grandma Fanny and my Aunt Lena. And she is real. And when I was a little girl, I lived in this big extended family situation. And we lived with my Aunt Lena and my mom and dad, and I had uncles in the house. But the business with the funeral home is, that's just part of my history. All of the women, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 women every afternoon would come over to our kitchen and have a coffee clutch. And they would go over the obits because South River didn't have, like a country club. They had 2 funeral parlors, and that was where the whole social scene was. And so so I would sit there and I would listen, to these women talking about how, Henry Farber looked so good last night. They really did a nice job on him. And didn't you love his tie? And I heard, and the makeup lady, they all had their favorite makeup ladies who, didn't you think she made Mary Jane's hair just beautiful? She was just like she was real, so this is my background as a kid. Well, I like Lula and I like Grandma. And they're actually the way that I bring a lot of humor into it, because Lula can do and say things that would be inappropriate for Stephanie, especially in this stage of woke, which I have to say right now, I'm not woke. I'm not even politically correct. I try to offend as many people as possible. I want no part of cancel culture. I'm just not going there. That's not my thing. When I grew up, now we have all these words you're not supposed to say. We have all these rules of what you're supposed to do. When I was a kid, there were only two things you had to know: common sense and kindness. That was it. That covered everything. I wasn't always successful at either of those. But I tried. I always knew. And to this day, I know that that's what is important, and that's the governing thing. And so I'm surprised that nobody's sued me or burned down my house or, but anyway, and Lula gives me the freedom to do that, because Lula is such a big character. She's so outrageous that she's allowed to be outrageous and to do things and to say things. And she doesn't say them in a mean way, because none of my major characters are mean people. They're good people. They're not perfect. They have flaws. They're not always successful. They try, but they're not mean. And I try not to have any of that in my stories. But Lula gets away with a lot of stuff.
Turning to the case creation side of writing these books in and out, whether it's finding or missing Uncle Fred in High Five, or hunting Ranger down in Hot Six, or an elderly woman shot dead in a shed in 7 Up, searching for a missing child and mother in Hard 8, chasing the missing Mr. Singh to Vegas and to the Nines, or being on the run herself from a gang in 10 Big Ones. What kind of outlining process have you followed throughout the series, and are many of the twists and turns already mapped down before you sit down to begin writing?
Her life as a bounty hunter, that's a strange thing, because I have a storyline that runs through the entire book that sometimes is related to her being a bounty hunter, almost always. And then I have all these little side stories, which I have for a variety of reasons. One is they're fun and they add variety. But the other is that's the life of the bounty hunter. These guys would go out and they'd have a fistful of note cards of all these people that they were looking for. Some of these note cards were like 5 years old. Now, when you're out to get someone, you're bringing them back because your bail bondsman needs to get them back into the system or he loses his bond. And there's a time limit on that. Usually it's a year, but if you bring them back at any time, there's a possibility of getting some of your money back. So they go out and they have all of these, these cards of these people, and they're riding around and they're looking and they're talking to people. Have you seen so-and-so? That's the, the actuality of it. And then they have some that are hot, that have skipped out. They know where they're going. I would hang out with the bail bondsman and they would tell me these, hysterical stories there was this one lady. She was an older woman, and most of these bail bondsmen they're like little mom and pop agencies. She was in an airport and she saw this guy and she knew he was a skip from, I don't know, like a year ago or something like that, ran him down in the airport, here's this pistol packing little old lady too, that, made her apprehend, put this guy in, actually tackled him, and put him in cuffs and dragged him away in the airport. So there are stories like that. I make up stories within stories for these skips. But that's just, that's the life of a bounty hunter. Well, the part that I always most enjoy is just the character. The plot line is just the railroad track that my train runs on. It's like an ugly necessity for me. So, I mean, you need it, and it needs to be decent. Sometimes I like it more than others. I start with a very small outline. I always know where my characters are going. I know what the character development within the book is going to be. I know what's going to happen in relationships between characters, not just between Stephanie and the two men, but Stephanie and her family, Stephanie and her coworkers, things like that.
Seems like Stephanie's always in some kind of danger, from the mystery man trying to kill her throughout 11 on Top, or the evil Edward Scrogg in 12 Sharp, or Roland Pettiac in Lean Mean 13, or Wolf Grimoire in Plum Spooky, among many of an even more personal variety like Dickie Orr, Benito Ramirez, or Terry Gilliam. Who have been any of the most intimidating to face her off with over the years?
When I write the Plum, I write in first person. So the only head I can get into is Stephanie. And I can't see what anybody is doing unless Stephanie is seeing it. So it's a very limiting kind of writing. It's very personal. And the reader really identifies with my heroine. But at the same time, I'm limited in what I can do with the bad guy. Having a genuinely evil person with the plums is more difficult, and maybe not even appropriate for the series, because the series is really about not the badness of people, but the goodness of people.
Fearless 14, Finger Lickin' 15, and Sizzling 16 continue the heart-beating chases, along with Smokin' 17, Explosive 18, and Notorious 19, and novellas like Visions of Sugar Plums, Plum Lovin', Plum Lucky, and Plum Spooky, expanding to continually feature fantastically entertaining new supporting cast regulars like Loretta Rizzi and her son Mario, aka Zook, Walter Mooner Dunphy, Sally Sweet, Eddie Gazzara, Tank, Randy Biggs, Joe Juniak, Miss Bessler the elevator operator, and Dylan Ruddick. Any of these you most enjoy keeping company with on the page over the years?
The series is about family, community, people. The Plum series is about small heroes, heroes that are that support, that just everyday people that support each other. I mean, Stephanie Plum works at a job that she's probably not entirely suited for, but she pays her rent. Okay, I think that's heroic. To work at a job, to do the best you can, to put food on the table, to make your mortgage payment. That's a heroic thing to do. And so that's the Plum series. That's about these little heroes in the Plum series. I mean, somebody has to be putting things out there that are positive, that are about good people, that are about people who survive, who get into bad situations and somehow manage to work their way through it. And I think that's what excites me, is that role that I play. And that there are readers out there that appreciate that like that love the humor in the books, love the characters, get attached to them.
Now, no new Stephanie Plum novel would be complete without an FTA or failure to appear, many of whom continue to richly animate the canvas of new books with Uncle Sonny, Sanucci, and Takedown 20, Jimmy Paletti and Top Secret 21, Gobbles, aka Ken Globovic and Tricky 22, Larry Virgil and Simon Diggory in Turbo 23, Zero Slick, Johnny Chucci, and Leroy Barker in Hardcore 24. And who could forget the Red River Deli Kidnapper in Look Alive 25, Tyrone Brown and Travis Wisniewski in Twisted 26, or George Potts, Arnold Rugalowski, and Rondi Trotter in Tantalizing 27, Fortune and Glory, or Oswald Wednesday, Melvin Schwartz, and Mary Jane Merkel in Game On, Tempting 28. Do you feel like readers have come to expect to meet these new cast of characters each book in and out, or say in Going Rogue, Rise and Shine 29?
I start with the kernel of an idea. In Going Rogue, number 29, it's that Connie is kidnapped. And so that is the basic plot line that runs through the book. And I know how it's going to begin, and I know how it's going to end, and I know a few things in the middle. And that's my outline. That's what I start with. It's maybe 3 pages on a steno pad. And then when I start writing, I go to bed at night with the steno pad and I write down a little synopsis of what I did during the day. And I write down a little synopsis of what I think I'm going to do when I wake up in the morning. And so, or sometimes that will be for the next 2 or 3 days if I know where that line is going. And that really is kind of the way that I progress through the book. As soon as I'm done with that book, it belongs to someone else. That book, as soon as it leaves my desk, it belongs to the people who are reading it. And being that I have like limited capacity up here, I chuck that book out. So I go to like book signings and my readers know every detail about every book. And I have no idea what they're talking about. I can barely remember the early books. I make, mistakes like Joe Morelli had a scar in his eyebrow and 2 books later it was on the other eyebrow. I mean, I'm not. And so it's always, my favorite book is always the book that I'm writing, or at least the book that I just finished writing, because I have a relationship to that. 29 was Going Rogue, and Connie was kidnapped in that book. And that really carried pretty much through the book. There were some bad guys that turned out to be really bad guys, and they wanted a coin that came into the bail bonds office. And actually, I had fun with this because Vinny got this coin from a guy he bailed out, and the next guy in line picked Vinny's pocket and got the coin. And then the coin started traveling from one person to the next. And these bad guys really wanted the coin. And Stephanie had to get the coin so she could rescue Connie. And then she rescued Connie. And then it turned out it wasn't the right coin. And then they snatched Vinny. And then nobody was sure if they really wanted to rescue Vinny.
You've kept your hardcore crime fiction fans happy with the new cases that Stephanie and co are solving, book in and out. Whether we're talking about the feral chihuahuas running loose in Stark Street and Grandma Mazur's bucket list, or the Zeta fraternity pranks, or stolen trucks of bourbon and Bogart ice cream, or babysitting a boa constrictor, or 3 missing Red River deli managers in a row, or the death of longtime gangster Jimmy Roselli and the hunt for his buried treasure. The search for computer hacker Oswald Wednesday, our poor kidnapped office manager Connie Rosali and the hunt for a mysterious coin, all while still satisfying those same readers' romance itch with the kind of steam that you keep going between Stephanie and her love interest throughout. What kind of balance have you consistently tried to strike here throughout the years?
Stephanie, I think one of the reasons Stephanie is so popular is because she's like most of us. She didn't grow up wanting to be a brain surgeon. She fell into a job and then she learned how to do it, and she just kind of puts one foot in front of the other every day. With Stephanie Plum, I wasn't really thinking 30 books. So I have her with Joe Morelli, and then I have her with Joe Morelli and Ranger. And it's very difficult to keep these people apart. It's difficult not to turn this into a family saga. Actually, I'm working on the next Plum now. I'm working on Plum number 30, which is Dirty 30.
This franchise proved to be so popular that into the hundreds of millions of books, it spawned a spin-off series, Wicked, with Lizzie and Diesel, based on the popular characters from the Plum books, featuring wicked appetite, wicked business, and wicked charms. What was most exhilarating about getting to go down these completely different sorts of investigative roads here, with totally different sorts of antagonists? Whether we're talking about treasure hunter Gerwolf Grimoire in the first, the search for the Luxurious Stone and arrival of Hatchet in the second, our mummified bootlegger Collier Peg-Leg Dazzle, Wolf, and the Stone of Avarice in the third.
Lizzie and Diesel, I loved that series. That was the Wicked series. And I would have liked to have done more. I just physically ran out of time. I couldn't get to them. I always thought it would have made an amazing, it should have gone to television because it's just fun. It's special. It's a little different. And Diesel has always been my favorite guy. There's just something about Diesel that appeals to me. And so because I couldn't find the time to write any more Wicked series books, every now and then I squashed Diesel into the Plum series. And so he's in Game On. And he comes in and he works with Stephanie because they're actually after the same person. And so the sneaky thing that I did now, because I do really like Diesel, is when I created Recovery Agent, Rayford Jones actually has a lot of Diesel in him. If you look at Rayford Jones, you can see some of Diesel.
Now, you're legendary for your teams. Please share where you first conjured up Alex Barnaby and NASCAR driver Sam Hooker. And what were your favorite highlights of racing around on the page with them, solving cases in and out over Miami, and of course, a Metro Girl and Motormouth?
My daughter and I are big NASCAR fans. And for years, we were, NASCAR groupies. We had a really good friend who was one of the people in the office. And he was head of NASCAR corporate communications. And so for years, we had a hard card. We just traveled around with NASCAR. I just love the cars. I mean, people would say, "Who's your favorite driver?" And we'd be stumped, because it wasn't the driver; it was the cars that we liked. We got to go into the garages, and so when I did those two NASCAR books. It was, that was someplace that I didn't have to do research for. It was something that I already loved, and I just wanted to write a couple books about NASCAR. And I especially wanted to write a book about a woman who was very different from Stephanie Plum. I mean, when you have somebody who is your bread and butter heroine and goes on for so long, you run the risk of really getting stale. And so every now and then I take an excursion out of Stephanie's head and go into someone else's. And that was the case with the NASCAR books. And I thought it would be fun to write a book about a woman who did have a passion, who had a skill, a talent, who knew what she wanted to do right from the time she was a little girl. And that was my NASCAR book, because this woman was a mechanic. And she was the mechanic for, the NASCAR driver.
What about extending the series next into the family business when you and daughter Alex co-authored the graphic novels Troublemaker and Troublemaker 2 together? What was most exciting about working with her creatively, and who came to who with this idea first?
When I sold my first book, when I sold One for the Money, when I sold my first big book, and we sold it to the movies, and I got $1 million for that. And I mean, they called me up and they said, "You sold your book," and it was a big thing out on the West Coast, and you sold it for $1 million. And I was living in this little sort of ramshackle brick house in Fairfax, Virginia, and all of the shingles off my roof were laying on the front lawn. I could see them glittering in the moonlight because they'd blown off in a rainstorm, and we didn't have any money for a new roof. And somebody just told me that I got $1 million. I was a millionaire. And so when that happened, I said to my son and my daughter, we're going to pay off all your education loans, and we now have money. You can do what you want. You can go to law school. You can start a business. What would you like to do? And both of them decided to throw in with me and become part of my business. And they've been part of my business ever since. And so when Alex and I did that book, I mean, we had already worked together for a long time. I mean, Alex is my best friend. We all live together. We actually even like each other, my kids and I. And so, so when we wrote that book, I mean, it's actually my favorite book. I think it's a wonderful book. It's actually my favorite book. I think the artwork in it is wonderful. We didn't do it. We hired an artist. But Alex did all the heavy lifting in that book. She really wrote the book, and I just came along and made a few contributions and added my name to it. But I think it's fun, and we would love to do more. But doing a graphic novel is very complicated and just time consuming, and you have to have a lot of other people involved. There are inkers and there are artists, and it's a big production.
What about working with Doreen Kelly on Love in a Nutshell and setting up the series at a bed and breakfast in Michigan in the first, and then way back in 1894 for the sequel, The Husband List? And what gives you the greatest joy about creating a new family like the Culhane clan for fans to fall in love with here?
I was with St. Martin's at the time, and I have always been a big Regency romance reader. I love the Regency area. And I always wanted to do sort of the American version, you know. And we had read some books by Dorian and thought she was just a wonderful writer, and asked her if she wanted to co-author some books with us. And so she said, sure. And so the first book that we wrote, St. Martin said, well, I don't think you can do a historical. Your fans aren't going to want that. So we sort of forced Dorian into writing Love in a Nutshell. It really wasn't her thing. I mean, she did a good job of it, but it wasn't what she loved to do. And then after that, she wrote the historical, and I thought that was amazing. And we would have loved to have had more, but she had other interests, and you know, she had a life.
You and Lee Goldberg teamed up to write the first few books in the series together, from the caper to the heist, the chase, the job, the scam, and the pursuit, along with novellas Pros and Cons and The Shell Game. Who first came to whom with the idea of teaming FBI agent Kate O'Hare and con artist Nicholas Fox?
Because we did a bunch of books together, and Lee and I had been friends for a long time, and you know, decided, I don't know, probably in a bar one night, I can't even remember, you know, hey, wouldn't it be fun to write books together? Well, the thing that Lee really brought to the table was the idea. He had this idea for the series. He really created the characters. He plotted it out. And you know, I kind of came in and sprinkled some fairy dust at the end. And then, but he's crazy. The man is insane. Okay. He never sleeps. I'd get phone calls at 3 a.m. We'd get emails, you know, and you know, and just trying to keep up with him is just impossible. We went on book tour together. It was fun. It was great. But that was my first, I had done co-authors before, in the romance genre. And, you know, but working with Lee was my first real experience with, you know, putting out this major book with my name on it with somebody else. Some people have lives. And then, you know, which is sort of what happened with Lee Goldberg.
You collaborated with your son Peter to equal success on The Big Kahuna, the next in the very popular Fox and O'Hare series. What was unique about that co-writing experience to others you'd had before it?
After we did a bunch of books, you know, because he's an A-list showrunner, and he had a lot of other things going on. And so, so that series sort of came to an end, and we tried to find some other co-authors, but you know, it was Lee's project, and it was never, you know, quite the same. And especially since we love Hawaii, and he actually lives in Hawaii now, on the Big Island, and I have a condo there because I have grandchildren there, so I have to have the grandma condo. And we spend 3 or 4 months in Hawaii every year. So when he wrote The Big Kahuna, that was just fun because, you know, we were writing about, you know, a place that we loved and we knew, and it was fun to work together. But again, you know, as with co-authors, I don't know how James Patterson does it. He gets these co-authors, they work out perfectly. They're, you know, my co-authors, you know, write a couple books with me, and then they say, I think I've had enough of Janet, and move on.
The baton was next passed to Steve Hamilton to co-write The Bounty together. What can fans expect beyond that in the future of the Fox and O'Hare series?
The Bounty was kind of a one-off. It was one of the few people that I didn't know very well. Usually I work with friends, you know, with old friends. And it's more a project of like, wow, wouldn't it be fun to do something together? With Hamilton, it was more, he was with my agent, who was the guy who was my agent at the time and no longer is. And he came in to, you know, see if he could fit into the program a little bit. But again, you know, he had projects of his own.
Do you envision doing any more co-writing on the horizon?
I don't have any co-authors going on at the time. I think I sort of decided that I have enough going with, I want to continue the Recovery Agent series.
Let's turn to that very franchise, The Recovery Agent, which has already been hailed by the AARP as a breezy, action-packed caper, told with J.E.'s signature humor. While Mystery Scene magazine reassured fans hoping for another of your usual page-turners that the latest moves at lightning speed and never stops. This new series feels distinct from Evanovich's other hits, but is every bit as addictive. Was this idea an offshoot of the Plum series you've been playing with conceptually for a while before you sat down to begin bringing it to life on the page?
That was something that I have wanted to do for a long time. And you can only do so many books. So if I did another book with Steve, then, the other interests would get pushed aside because I don't know how Patterson does it. I can't do it. The man is amazing. But I wanted the Recovery Agent. All my life, I have loved adventure stories. And I have wanted to do this series for a long time about a woman who was just really the opposite of Stephanie Plum. Stephanie Plum is like me, woman's lib is okay until you have to kill a spider. And then, I see no reason why you can't go get a man to do it. Gabriella Rose in The Recovery Agent, she's got some poisonous bug crawling up her sleeve and she just flicks it off. She is not afraid of snakes. She's a crack shot. She is a black belt. She knows self-defense. She's a gourmet cook. She's a fashionista. She discovered that she's good at finding things and she makes a lot of money at it. She has a nice condo in New York and a fashionable district downtown. And she, so she's a very accomplished, capable person. Which of course I've saddled with her hateful ex-husband, Rafer, who is Diesel in disguise. And she sort of can't get away from him. And that's the fun of it. I finished the Recovery Agent. I started this new series. And that had an amazing bad guy because he was just a whack job. He was just off the charts. And it was such an enlightening, expanding experience for me because it was this big adventure. It was Stephanie Plum is like keeping your heroin in a phone booth or a closet. And when I did the Recovery Agent, I had the whole world. I could have my adventure anywhere. And so and that bad guy was a real bad guy. When I wrote the Recovery Agent is written in third person. So I could follow the bad guy around and I could get into his head a little bit. And that's a whole different experience. And then you can have a genuinely evil person. When I did Recovery Agent, it was about a larger hero. It was about Indiana Jones. It was about Nicolas Cage. With the Recovery Agent, I've saddled this poor woman with this man that they cannot get along at all. I mean, they're very hot for each other, but you can't go 5 minutes without arguing. And that was a lot of the fun of writing the book, was just, putting these two people together and then being able to go all over the world into jungles and have them, diving and going through lava tunnels and searching for treasure. And so I'm looking forward to doing another one of those. I only do one at a time, although I do know where Recovery Agent is going to go. I think this next one is going to be in Europe and maybe the Middle East. Maybe down into parts of Africa, but I don't really get too involved in plot. If I get an idea, I write it down, on my steno pad. But for the most part, I write one book at a time.
ABC News in a cover story recently described your writing routine as one where in her early years, she worked on books whenever parenthood permitted, but now she has the steady, uninterrupted routine. She wakes up around 5 in the morning, makes herself coffee, and joined by her dog, a Havanese named Ollie, steps into her home office and enters that little world, building upon a set of notes she wrote the night before. Please give fans and viewers a little peek inside that world, and what keeps you energized when you sit down to begin writing anew each day?
I think it's the reader. I think it's knowing that, I feel like I have a place in the literary world. I'm the pod author. I'm that you read when you're having a bad day. I'm the author that goes against the grain of in the world out there. I think it's that role. It's not necessarily what I'm writing, although sometimes, I mean, I do enjoy that. I think it's more, my role in the scheme, which after 20 some plums is a feat in itself. It's not, sometimes I'm half thinking to myself, oh dear, what am I going to do with this woman now, and then something comes up. But
Within the pages of How I Write, what are any favorite gems of timeless writing throughout your career that you'd share with the aspiring author watching here?
I had with all these people because it took me so long to get published. As a slow learner, I didn't go to get help. One of the things that I tell them, join thriller writers of America, join romance writers. Don't listen to everybody's advice. Choose what you think is appropriate for you. Peer group is important, and these have meetings and newsletters. An agent, once you write the book, that's only the beginning of an agent. Difficult, and it gets more difficult all the time. But if you, you can actually agents, and you can talk to people who have agents, and that's you can go about it. And if it's important to you, you stay with it. Me 10 years. I wrote a whole books before I had one published, and I didn't want to. I was fortunate. I think even though I sort of given up and gone out, and eventually I would have come back to writing again. And I try to tell people that, I mean, this is a job. And when someone says to you, you put yourself out there. I'm a writer, I'm writing a book. You don't, because you have to get a thick skin. You have to believe in yourself, put it out there. You have to put yourself on the line. And you pretend, like if you had a job at 7-Eleven, you'd show up at 7 o'clock at night, and it's no different. You find some time every day that you can write a paragraph or two, and you stay with it. It's not, you don't inspiration. It's you're a professional. This is a job.
Janet, it has been absolutely entertaining speaking with you today. Thank you so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Thank you. It's been great.